All right. Hi, everyone. Sorry for the little bit of a late start, but thanks for tuning into Trib Talk. I'm Jessica Miller. I'm a reporter here at the Salt Lake Tribune. And today we're talking about the troubled teen industry. And our guest is Jen Robison. She's one of the founders of Breaking Code Silence, which is a growing online movement where people have been sharing their stories about what happened to them while at youth residential treatment centers in Utah and across the country. So thank you so much for joining me today, Jen.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. I'm really glad we could connect.
So to start off, I'm hoping you could kind of explain, what the troubled teen industry is for people who might not be familiar with it.
Yeah, it certainly is a strange term to hear having know nothing about it. That's the term that has been adopted over time. The best way that I can explain it would be as a vast and highly profitable network of facilities and programs which advertise treating or rehabilitating struggling youth. And it's a huge industry in this country that spans, the history goes back decades at this point, the early 70s.
And there's a lot of places here in Utah. I recently did a large piece about the industry in Utah, found that there's more than 100 facilities currently operating, and a lot of these places are bringing in tens of millions of dollars in profit yearly from not just parents paying for their kids to come, but foster children, kids in the juvenile justice care system, and Medicaid contracts. And Jen, you were one of those who was sent to Utah back in 2003. You went to Provo Canyon School when you were 14. So I'm wondering if you could kind of tell me a little bit about that experience. How did you end up coming to Utah?
Okay. Yeah, so I was 14. I was sent to Provo Canyon School after it was recommended to my parents by a professional in UCLA hospital. I was suffering with depression caused by a childhood post-traumatic stress disorder from earlier childhood trauma. And it was promised to my parents that this would be an option to help me deal with that trauma and that depression. So that's what brought me there. And I think actually something that I wanted to bring up for context, because I think that it's true for myself and true for a lot of kids, was that I would credit a lot of what went wrong with me as a kid with the amount of medication that I was placed on from a very early age. I was started on psychotropic medications from age 9. And looking back on that now, and I put it together, I realize, gosh, that same year I had just witnessed the slow death of a family member to cancer, and then was within that year put on antidepressant medications when in reality I was grieving and dealing with other trauma. And I think that happens to a lot of kids. I don't want that to say that there are not situations where children or individuals do benefit from medication. But there does seem to be a trend in this country of over-medicating children rather than addressing the issues that are causing the behavior. And all of that culminated in me going to Provo Canyon School.
So tell me a little bit about what the school was like. I mean, what are memories like now as you've grown up? What are the memories that you kind of replay, or the things that left an impression on you?
I think, just to start with, the idea of it being a school or having school in the name has always been kind of entertaining to me. They, at that time, were based on an extremely rigorous, structured system. You would be placed into the facility and placed into a very regimented schedule, enormous list of rules, from how to fold your underwear into perfect little squares and place them in the right place in the drawer, to which things you could say, to what you could refer to your peers as, no first names, last names only, all of these infractionable offenses, which can lead to further punishments. And it was a fear-based control system, which I think was really more a result of what is intended as a behavioral modification system improperly executed by an undersupported, undertrained, and underqualified staff. And I think that while we did go to the school area of the building every day, unless you were placed on investment like I was and restricted from ever leaving the unit, it's hard just in that structure and in that removal of rights and that removal of individuality and the the daily fear. But then I guess the parts that I replay in my mind over and over would be the use of the seclusion, watching my peers tackled, watching my peers medicated to the point where they could barely think or know who they were. And then when those children who are afraid and frustrated and denied any acknowledgement of their autonomy act out, the severity with which they are responded to is so damaging. So I remember those girls, and I remember what happened to them, and I remember the seclusion and isolation that I was left in for so long. And so those would be the things that stick with me, that motivate me now.
So during that time, were you or the other girls in the program given the opportunity to, tell your parents what was going on, or tell a lawyer or other people, outside of the school? What was the reaction if you tried to tell somebody what was happening?
Parents are prepared from the beginning for the possibility that your kids are going to say something is wrong or that something is abusive, and they are coached that these are troubled youth. A lot of these kids have difficulties in their past. Maybe they have been dishonest. Maybe they've run away. Maybe none of that. Maybe they're honest kids, but they're immediately funneled into this category, this stigma that they are manipulative liars. And so the moment any kid, and you would see this happen to your peers, that if a kid went on a phone call, which was always monitored by a therapist or staff, at least on the lower levels, that call would be ended and you would be punished immediately. And the parents would be told that the child was manipulating to get them to pull them out of the program because they just didn't want to work on themselves and didn't want to do something hard. And so for the few that did try to tell their parents, it usually resulted in immediate punishment for them. But then the effect that creates on the culture within the school is that what happens to others, and you kind of quickly fall into that silence, that if you want to get by and if you want to get out of here, you better get with the program and be quiet.
Mm-hmm. So what was it kind of like, after you've left and grown up? I've talked with probably dozens of people at this point who shared their experiences and have talked about how they struggled coping with what happened to them after they left the facility. Was that your experience? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. In the beginning, especially the first couple of years after I left, I can say quite honestly that I was much worse off than I ever was when I went, and I struggled tremendously to deal with not only the institutional abuse, but with even understanding what had happened to me at all. I was an adolescent, just barely forming my identity, just like everybody else, no matter what their problems were. And we were effectively erased and rebuilt. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, not only to recognize that it exists, but to do something to reclaim yourself. I consider myself one of the extremely lucky ones, that I knew from the jump that something bad had happened and that I needed to explore it and address it. And through diving into that and digging out the dirt from the wound, I like to think of it, I was able to overcome that programming and overcome what was done. And I think by taking such an interest in the industry itself and in the system that has failed so many of our kids, that has been tremendously healing for me, and it's helped me to find strength to speak for others.
Yeah, that kind of leads into my next question is, when did that process for you become advocacy and wanting to speak out about the industry?
I mean, if I could go back, I'd say it even started when I was 16 years old, resisting in what little peaceful ways I was able. But I actually did try to speak out back in 2008 when I was 19 years old, when I was still struggling pretty hard, and I think I didn't quite know how to speak about what happened, and I knew nothing about the industry as a whole. I hadn't done my research yet, but I knew then that something was wrong and that this shouldn't be happening to kids. And so I tried to speak out then, and in the years since, especially starting about 3.5 years ago, as I dove down the rabbit hole and began to understand more about how this industry formed, how the lack of regulation and corruption has caused problems for children. I would say I really dove in deep about 3 years ago, and then much more so recently with Breaking Code Silence.
Mm-hmm. So tell me more about Breaking Code Silence. What is it? What is the movement about?
Yeah, so Breaking Code Silence started quite a ways back in 2013 as a collaborative effort between activists and as a challenge survivors of institutional abuse to come out about what happened to them. And it gained some traction then, but gained more full attention in the last year and a half when the leadership team and I came together to really form this into a platform and a viral social movement. For me, by using the short videos of people telling their stories, and by people sharing their stories independently, writing them down, putting it out there, and making it clear how very many of us there are who were harmed by this, that would get the public to pay attention and then seek to find more information. And if you go to breakingcodesilence.net, essentially our stories become the hook for people to pay attention, to understand that this is real. And then if you go to the website, you can learn so much more about what the industry is, what the problems are, and what we hope to change.
So you joined on this movement more than a year ago, but it's recently gotten a big boost after Paris Hilton talked about her own story of abuse at Provo Canyon School in her documentary that was released, I think, last week. So how has the reaction been just in this time that, Paris has kind of become public about this? What's the response been like for your movement?
It's been a whirlwind. I think that the reaction has been dramatically positive. I mean, survivors feel encouraged, not only because Breaking Code Silence was already here, giving the people a platform and the knowledge that we are all ready to come out about this together, and we're not going to be quiet about it anymore. But I think Paris has emboldened that community and has made it feel safe for the rest of us to come forward. And I think that Paris would agree that the opportunity that we have here is that this has just been the opening of the door on this conversation, that we need to open that conversation much bigger to what is wrong with the industry, that Paris's story is one of thousands like hers. And so, we're appreciative to her that she was willing to use her platform to help us be better heard. And I think we're all looking forward to what's next.
So one of the goals of Breaking Code Silence is to bring awareness to the troubled teen industry and promote reform and change. And so I'm wondering, what does that look like for you? What are the areas that needs to be changed in this industry?
So many. Our hopes would be to focus on reform on both the state level and the federal level, because until there is some regulation on the federal level, we're going to keep falling into these loopholes and legal gray areas that exist in places like Utah, where, as beautiful and wonderful as Utah is in so many ways, it has also gained somewhat of a reputation as being kind of the crown jewel for institutional child abuse, and that shouldn't exist. So if we can create federal legislation to create better accountability, stricter regulations on the programs, stricter regulations about what staffing should look like, how staff should be trained and vetted, so that we have actual professionals dealing with these children and not young college-age kids that are totally ill-prepared for the stressful situations that they're placed in, and then breeds these cultures of abuse. We need to make it harder from a legal standpoint for facilities to cut corners in the favor of profit and make that focus on child safety and real evidence-based treatment.
It looks like, so we do have a point where we can have people ask questions using the hashtag Trib Talk. I think we might have one question coming in, but I haven't seen it yet, so I can't ask it quite yet. But I guess as I'm kind of just buying time, is there other parts about the industry that you want people to know about, or people who are watching this, what should be the takeaway that they take from this?
There's lots of takeaway. I mean, one takeaway, I think, what part of the conversation that I'm seeing happening right now, we have fewer survivors who are able to come forward and talk about abuse in recent years. And I don't mean at Provo Canyon School, I mean as a whole in this industry. And I think it needs to be pointed out that for many of us. It takes years, if not decades, to really understand what was done to us as children and how to recover from that. And so whatever may have changed from when I was in facilities to now, the problems still do exist. We're hearing about it from young survivors every day, and it takes them time to be able to come forward. But I wanted to actually give a bit of a perspective on what this industry looks like today, if we have time for that.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about this morning, that we have, of course, these large facilities. We have multi-billion-dollar umbrella corporations that run many different kinds of programs. We have smaller religious programs that are, exempt from pretty much any oversight. We have wilderness camps. All of these things still exist, and all of these things are still underregulated. And you see it as this big monster. But then, as an anecdote to give you an idea of the scope of what this is, last year my team was tipped off that one of the individuals who was involved in some of the earliest days of the troubled teen industry and was part of some of the most abusive facilities, which were in fact shut down due to those abuses, we were tipped off that this individual was still taking children and still treating children. And we thought, well, gosh, that sounds not good. So I decided to, on a whim, kind of cold call this program and see if I could just get the secretary to slip up and say, oh yeah, he's here, I can give him a message for you, so that we could verify whether or not this individual was still taking children today. In doing this, I ended up having a 45-minute plus conversation with the man himself, and found out quite quickly that the boarding school that I was calling did not in fact exist. There was nothing at that location that was advertised on Google Maps. There were actually 3 programs advertised on Google Maps in the same area with the same contact information, and they were acting essentially as fronts. And that once you got contact with these front facilities, what he was actually then pitching to me, calling as a concerned parent, was that he would take my daughter and get her an expedited passport, have his people pick her up from a Dunkin' Donuts and whisk her away to Costa Rica, where he keeps children in a program there. And I think that moments like this show me that the corruption and that the lack of accountability and the lack of oversight still exists today as it did decades ago. If someone like that, who had programs shut down for abuse 20 years ago, is still taking children to Costa Rica today, that greatly concerns me. And I think that they continue talking about this and continue investigating.
Right. So the question that we have, it's from someone named Cody. He posted this on our Facebook. He says that he's been working with adolescents for over 10 years in various roles. He started as staff and now he's a therapist. He says he's seen a lot of things and sure he's made mistakes. But he's seen a lot of mistreatment and spoken out about it. He says he thinks he treats the kids with respect as if they were his own kids. But anyways, he wants to be an advocate and wants to know how he can be supportive. How can he help make change?
First and foremost, by speaking out about those abuses that he's witnessed, so that people can understand. We still need more staff members coming forward to talk about the issues so that we can give this better perspective, that it's not just coming from the survivors and the parents, it's coming from the staff as well. Get involved with the movement and make this known. And if you're working in a facility where you see any types of abuses or mistreatment still happening, I hope that you will be reporting all abuses and hopefully not working in such a facility. But I think the greatest way to be an ally would be get involved, talk about what's happening, and support legislative action.
I think that might be all the questions I have. I don't see any other ones coming in, but what's the best way for people to connect with your organization going forward if they want to connect with the movement?
The best ways really would be join us on social media. We have the Breaking Code Silence public Facebook page. We have our Instagram page. We're on Twitter. If you want to be an advocate or an ally to the cause, you're welcome to join the private Facebook page. That is where we network to decide best strategies for awareness and for future change. That would be, yeah, that's my recommendation. And you can find out lots of information on breakingcodesilence.net.
Perfect. Well, Jen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, and thanks to everybody who tuned in and asked questions. I've done a lot of reporting on this topic, and so if you want to read more of my work or the work of my colleagues, you can do that at sltrib.com. Thank you.
Thank you.